Hello and welcome to the 11 Plus mock exam 10-minute test for paper 5. Do make sure that you've had a go at the questions yourself, which are in the video description, or you can get the questions over at www.11plushub.com. Okay, let's go straight into it then. So question 1 says calculate 0.3 multiplied by 0.07. Okay, so when I'm dealing with decimal values, I like to change them into whole numbers because it makes my life so much easier. Okay, so let's start by dealing with 0.3. So 0.3, if we were to multiply that by 10, it would become a whole number. If we were to multiply it by 10, in other words, move the decimal point one place to the right, what would that number look like? It would say 0.3 point nothing, okay, which is the same as 3. So I'm going to rewrite the number now 3, bearing in mind that I've moved the decimal point one place to the right. I'll make a note of it because it's important I don't forget that. Now we've got 0.07. I'm going to do a very similar thing here, 0.07, and change this into a whole number. I'm going to change it into the number 7, okay? But you'll notice that this time I have to move my decimal point one place, 2 places to the right so that it leaves the number and therefore becomes a whole number. So I had to move the decimal point twice that time, and altogether I've moved the decimal point 3 times, once for 0.3 and twice for 0.07. But now my question becomes 3 multiplied by 7, which is much easier, much more straightforward, which is 21. Now we moved the decimal point 3 places to the right, which means I now need to get my decimal point and move it back inside that number 3 places to the left to compensate for what we did earlier. Okay, so 1 place to the left, it would be 2.1. A second place to the left would be 0.21. Let's just get rid of this so it's clearer to see. 0.21. Now if I move it 1 more place to the left, what's going to happen is, it's very tricky to move this, I apologize. It's going to jump 1 space, but we're going to have this space here with nothing in it. Okay, so we need to express that with our placeholder 0. Okay, just like that, and we have the answer on the screen, 0.021, which is the same as 0.021. Okay, so well done if you said D. Okay, moving on to question 2. Sophia is making a bracelet. She creates it using 8 beads. For every bead used, Sophia needs a piece of string which is 5.5 centimeters in length. How much string does Sophia need in total? Okay, so we're told that she needs string at the length of 5.5 centimeters. So that's clearly going to be important to the question. But how many of those does she need? Well, it says for every bead used, she needs a 5.5 centimeter string, and she used 8 beads. That means she needs 8 lots of 5.5 centimeter strings. Okay, so the question becomes 5.5 centimeters multiplied by 8. Now we know that we're dealing with centimeters. Okay, so don't worry, as long as you don't forget, don't worry too much about this for the time being. Okay, we know we're dealing with centimeters. If you want, you can put it on the side so you don't forget. But for now, let's take a look at the numbers. We've got 5.5 multiplied by 8. Okay. Now, like we did in the previous question, we're going to change decimal values, decimal numbers, into whole numbers. Now, 8 is already a whole number, so we will leave that alone. To turn 5.5 into a whole number, I'm going to get my decimal point and move it once to the right, because if I do that, it will say 55 point or 55 point nothing, which is a whole number. 55 is a whole number. So I need to move it 1 place to the right. Let's not forget that. Okay, but then my question becomes 55 multiplied by 8. Okay, so let's solve that. So 8 times 5 is 40. So 0 goes underneath. 4 gets carried over. 8 multiplied by 5 again is 40. Add the 4 that we carried over is 44. Now our answer here is 440, and we're dealing with centimeters, so 440 centimeters. But remember, I need to move the decimal place the decimal point one place to the left. Okay, so it's after the number. Now I need to move it back in just one place because that's how many places I moved it. Okay, and I'm going to get 44.0 centimeters, which is the same as 44 centimeters. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Which of the following is a prime number? Okay, so a prime number is a number that has two factors, which are itself and 1. In other words, it cannot be divided by any other whole number and result in a whole number besides itself and 1. Okay, so if any of these numbers here have any other factors, in other words, can be divided by any other whole number, it isn't a prime number. Okay, so this is where our knowledge of times tables and number relationships is very important. Okay, so can 27 be divided by any other number besides itself and 1? Well, of course. We don't need to look at every single example for all of these numbers, by the way. As soon as we found one factor, that's enough. So 3 goes into 27, doesn't it? 3 multiplied by 9, they're both factors of 27. So 27 is not a prime number. 44 isn't a prime number because it can be divided by 4 times 11. 39 isn't a prime number. It's in the 3 times tables, 3 times 13. 49 isn't a prime number. 7 times 7, so 7 is a factor of 49. Now 59 doesn't have any factors besides itself and 1. So 59 and 1 are the only factors of 59, and therefore it's a prime number. Now, I did kind of rush through this question because in order to figure out whether a number like 59 is prime, well, you might be thinking, well, how do I do that? How do I have to check through every single number to see if it's a factor of 59? And the truth is that there is a very, very clear, very straightforward system. And if you head over to the prime numbers video tutorial on this channel or over at 11plushub.com, you can learn all about that technique. We won't do it just yet because we need to get through this 10-minute test. But if you do struggle with finding whether or not a number is prime, make sure to watch that video. Okay, let's move on to question 4. 3 multiplied by 15 plus 2 multiplied by 2. So when we are dealing with questions that have more than one operation, we must use BIDMAS. Okay, so we've got multiplication, addition, and multiplication. And BIDMAS tells us that we do the brackets first, then the indices, then we deal with division and multiplication, and then addition and subtraction. Okay, so we do not have brackets in this question, nor do we have indices. But we do have, well, we don't have division, but we've got multiplication. So that's the bit that comes first. Okay, so we're going to deal with all parts that involve multiplication. Okay, so we've got 3 multiplied by 15 and 2 multiplied by 2. We've got 2 lots of multiplication to sort out. Let's go from left to right in that case. So 3 times 15 is 45. So I've dealt with that bit. Then I've got my addition symbol, which I've not dealt with. So let's move it up. And then 2 multiplied by 2, which gives me 4. And now the question simply becomes 45 plus 4, which is 49. So the answer is C. Okay, let's move on to question 5. What is 20% of 500? Okay, so it's a bit of a tricky question to sort of compute or comprehend at first. It sounds a bit awkward, but what it's asking us is to find 20% of a certain value, and the value that it wants us to find 20% of is 20% of 500. So let's start off by finding 20% of 500. So how do we do that? Well, to find 10% of any number, we divide that number by 10. So 10% of 500 is going to be 50. Now to find 20%, I'm just going to double both sides. Okay, so 10% doubled is 20%. Therefore, we need to double the other side, and that's 100. So we've already figured out part of that question. 20% of 500 is 100. So what I could do is rewrite that part of the question. Now it says, what is 20% of 100? You probably already know what the answer is, based on what percentages are. But let's just use our technique, just so we're very familiar with the technique, okay? So 10% of 100 is going to be 10. Double 10% is 20%, so we're going to double the other side as well, which is 20, and we get our answer. Okay, let's move on to question 6. What is the value of 5 squared plus 3 cubed? Okay, now I always find to answer questions like this, I simply rewrite both values out, okay, in a linear multiplication fashion. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do 5 multiplied by 5, which represents 5 squared, add 3 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 3, which represents 3 cubed. Now, if you are confused by that, remember this floating number here, this squared symbol, that's how many 5s we need to multiply together. And this floating 3 symbol, that's how many 3s we need to multiply together, okay? Some students look at this as 5 times 2 plus 3 times 3, which is a completely different question, so be very careful with that, okay? All right, now you'll notice we've got an addition bang in the middle there, so we're going to leave that till last because of BIDMAS, and we're going to deal with the multiplication first, okay? So we've got 5 multiplied by 5, that gives me 25. And then over here, I've got 3 multiplied by 3 multiplied by 3. Well, 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. So I've now dealt with that bit. And then the question simply becomes 25 plus 27, which of course is 52. Okay, number 7. A car travels at a speed of 52 miles per hour. How many miles does the car travel in 15 minutes? When we have a question that mixes up units of measurement, okay, for example, here we've got miles per hour and we've got 15 minutes. Okay, we need to kind of find the relationship between them. Okay, now we know that an hour is 60 minutes. So the way to look at this question is a car travels at a speed of 52 miles per 60 minutes. So what I'm going to do over here is represent that in a much easier way. So 60 minutes equals 52 miles. So in 60 minutes, that's how many miles the car can travel. Let's just read that bit again so you can see what I mean. It says a car travels at a speed of 52 miles per hour or per 60 minutes. So this down here is telling us the speed of which the car is traveling, the car is traveling. All right, but the question is asking us how many miles does the car travel in 15 minutes? Well, we know what it travels in 60 minutes. So how are we going to figure out 15 minutes? Well, we need to figure out the relationship between 60 minutes and 15 minutes. Okay, so 60 divided by 4 is 15. 15 is a quarter of 60. So we're going to do the same to the other side. We need to do 52 divided by 4. So 52 inside the bus stop divided by 4. 4 goes into 5 the once with a 1 remainder. 4 goes into 12 3 times. And therefore we have 13 as our answer. So 13 miles, which is option B. Okay, moving on to question 8. A landscaper is measuring the perimeter of a rectangular garden. She calculates that the perimeter of the field is 40 meters. Okay, here's our field. Don't worry too much about the correct size of this rectangle. As long as we label it correctly, that's what's important, okay? Now it says if the length of the field is 14 meters, calculate the area of the field. So the length is the longest side. So we've got 14 meters at its longest side of the rectangle. But also the bottom side is also going to be 14 meters because it's a rectangle. They are both the same size, okay? We're also told that the perimeter of the field is 40 meters. Now, perimeter is when we add all of the sides of the rectangle together. When we add all 4 of those sides together, we're going to get 40 meters because it literally tells us that the perimeter is 40 meters. Okay, so what we need to do now is get 40 meters and subtract from it the known data, which is 2 lots of 14, which is 28. So 40 meters subtract 28 meters gives me 12 meters. That tells me that there are 12 meters that are unaccounted for when it comes to this rectangle and its perimeter. Now 12 meters needs to be split fairly between this side and that side. Okay, so 12 meters divided by 2, which is 6 meters and 6 meters. Okay, now if you look quickly at these sides and add them up really quickly, you'll notice that they do add up to 40 meters. So we know that it reflects the perimeter of 40 meters, which it tells us in the question. So far we know we're all good. But we need to calculate the area of the field. Now, how do we calculate the area of a rectangle? Well, we do length multiplied by width, okay? Which in this case is the longest side, so 14 meters, multiplied by the width, which is 6 meters. Okay, so it's up to you how you do this next bit. 14 multiplied by 6. Maybe you can do it in your head. Maybe you can use a column method. I do recommend, though, if you are going to try and do this mentally and you're not 100% certain of how to multiply 14 in your head, please do use a written method, okay? Don't throw marks away by making the mistake in your head. But 14 multiplied by 6 is going to give us 84. So let's write that down here. And then meter, we're multiplying the meters together, aren't we? Meter multiplied by meter is meter squared. Okay, so the answer is 84 meters squared, which is B. Okay, let's move on to question 9. A family spends 3 days at a holiday camp. They spent £53 on day 1, £100 on day 2, and £33 on day 3. Calculate the mean of the money spent across the 3 days. All right, so let's make this a bit easier for ourselves by only writing down the important information. It's not that important that they were on holiday, is it? What's important is the data, okay? So day 1, £53 was spent. Day 2, £100 was spent. And day 3, £33 was spent. Now, I know that it's a timed exam, okay, but do make sure very, very quickly, just always double check that you've written down the numbers correctly, okay? So 53, 53, 100, 100, 33, 33. Yep, I've written them down all correctly, because if I make one mistake when I'm writing my notes, it's going to change the entire answer, okay? So we've got to be very careful that we write these notes down very, very carefully, okay? All right, so how do we find the mean of data? What do we do with these numbers? Now, the mean is an average. We're trying to figure out what value best represents those 3 numbers over the 3 days. And the way we do that is by adding them all together, step 1. So we need to do 100 plus 53 plus 33. And that gives us 186. And remember, we are dealing with pounds, but don't worry too much about that symbol just yet. So £186. Now, what do we need to do with this? This isn't the average. This is the total of all 3 amounts. To find the average, I divide the total by the number of values that I've got. So I do 186 and I divide this by 1, 2, 3 because there are 3 values. So 186 divided by 3. Okay, so let's use the bus stop. 186 divided by 3. Okay, 3 into 1 doesn't go. 3 into 18 goes 6 times with no remainder. 3 into 6 goes twice. Our answer must be £62. Okay, and the final question. Max, Oliver and Amy are given stickers at a ratio of 2 to 1 to 5. In total, 72 stickers are given between them. How many stickers does Amy get? Okay, right, so how do we solve these sorts of ratio questions? Now, step one is to always think about how many total parts there are. So here is our ratio 2 to 1 to 5. If we add all of those numbers together, we're going to figure out how many parts there are, okay? So 2 plus 1 plus 5, there are 8 parts. Now, what we need to do with the number 8 is divide our quantity, how many things we've got, which is 72 stickers, by 8. Now, the bus stop doesn't really help us with 72 divided by 8, which is why it's a good idea to make sure that our times tables is brilliant. So let's do our 8 times tables to figure the answer out. Okay, so 8, 16, 24, 32, 40, 48, 56, 64, 72. 8 multiplied by 9, so 8 times 9 is 72. That means 72 divided by 8 is 9. Okay, now once we've got this answer, in other words, once we've divided our quantity by the number of parts we've got, we're going to get this number 9 and multiply it by each ratio amount. However, we don't have to spend all our time multiplying 9 by 2, 1 and 5 because we're only interested in what Amy gets. And Amy is written third. We've got Max first, Oliver second, Amy third, and the ratio numbers are written respectively. So Amy is reflected or represented, sorry, by the number 5. Okay, so we only need to multiply 9 by 5, which gives us 45.